The sun poured itself over the desert like an old sorrow. Golden, relentless, vast. Ava Walsh rode with her hat tugged low and her braid tucked against the nape of her neck, each hoofbeat slow and deliberate on the cracked red earth. The land stretched bare in every direction, no trees but a few hunched mesquites, no shade but her own. Her mare, Pepper, breathed steady beneath her, too tired to fight the heat, too loyal to stop. She wasn't out here looking for anything but quiet. The cattle had been run down to the lower pastures after the dust storms, and Ava had taken the long way back, following the old trail by instinct. She liked the silence, the kind that wasn't empty but full of something ancient and watchful. Out here, time didn't behave right. It creaked and swayed, folded in on itself like dried hide. The canyon walls in the distance loomed like old bones. She'd always said this desert could bury you easy and never mean it cruel. Still, there was something that made her fingers tighten slightly on the reins. A shift in the air, not wind, but presence. It began as a glint, too steady to be a mirage. A flicker near the base of a mesquite clinging to the edge of a shallow arroyo. Ava slowed Pepper and narrowed her eyes. Her hand drifted toward the rifle, holstered at her saddle. Could be metal. Could be glass. Could be nothing. She slid down from the saddle in one practiced motion, boots stirring up pale dust. The world was so quiet she could hear her own breath inside her ears. Step by step, she walked toward the shimmer. Then she saw it. Not metal. Not glass. A tarp. Torn and sun-bleached. Curled like a dying leaf over a knot of figures, so still they might have been rock. Then one moved. A jerky, startled flinch at the sound of her boots. The tarp shifted, and 4 pairs of eyes blinked up at her from shadows. Children, all of them bone-thin. Dirt clung to their skin like it belonged there. The oldest, a girl maybe 11, had her arms curled tight around a toddler with cracked lips and heat rash across her cheeks. 2 boys were wedged between them, no older than 8 and 5, faces slack with thirst and sun. Ava didn't speak right away. The silence hung between them, full of questions she'd never ask. She stepped forward and knelt, her bones aching with emotion. The smallest one, girl, maybe 2, let out a sound. Not a cry, just a breath, like the sound of something deciding not to die. Ava unfastened her canteen and tilted it gently to the oldest girl first. The child didn't move. "It's clean," Ava said softly. "Go on." The girl blinked at her, then nodded. She drank slow, careful, like she was afraid to wake something sleeping. Ava gave water to each child in turn, wiping the toddler's face with the hem of her sleeve. The boy in the middle clutched a ragged cloth horse to his chest. His lips moved, murmuring things only he could hear. "Where's your people?" Ava asked, not expecting an answer. The older girl shook her head. Not a no, not a yes. Just a long, numb drift of movement. Ava stood and looked out across the horizon. Nothing out there. No wagon. No smoke. No sign of whatever trail had left these children behind. And still no buzzards. No flies. She didn't waste time wondering. One by one, she lifted them into the saddle. The oldest she helped last. Girl's hands were scraped, raw like she'd been dragging someone. Maybe herself. Ava took the reins and began the long walk home. The sun hung low, and the air began to shift, cooler now, touched with the promise of night. None of the children spoke. The toddler, Pearl, the girl finally whispered, "Her name is Pearl," rested against Ava's shoulder like she belonged there. They walked for miles. The mare, burdened but steady, moved like she understood. The desert stayed quiet. And all the while, Ava felt something just out of reach, like a voice she couldn't hear or a hand pressed gently between her shoulder blades. Not danger, not dread, just something. She'd lost things before. A baby long ago, born too early in a spring storm. A husband who went off to mine silver and never came back. She'd buried hope once, like others buried their dead, deep, neat, quiet. But this wasn't hope. Not yet. This was breath. The first breath after a long silence. By the time the house came into view, low, square, and plain against the rising dusk, Ava's arms ached and her throat burned. But the toddler in her arms had opened her eyes again. The boy with the toy horse had whispered, "Is this where we stay?" And the oldest girl, whose name Ava still didn't know, had leaned her head back to look at the stars. Ava didn't answer. She simply nodded toward the porch light burning faintly against the dark. There was soup left from the night before. There were blankets. There were 4 small spaces on her floor that could be made into beds. She'd always said the house was too quiet anyway. She hadn't meant it as an invitation. And yet, as the last light slipped behind the horizon and Ava stood in the doorway watching the desert fold itself into darkness, she felt the breath again. Not wind, not storm, just something breathing out there in the silence. She didn't know its name. Not yet. The house had always creaked, but now it did so with purpose. Floorboards that once groaned under Ava's solitary steps now held the shuffle of small feet. The wind still found its way through the window frames at night, but it no longer howled. It hummed, like a lullaby that didn't need words. The children did not fill the house all at once. They eased into it the way shadows lengthen at dusk, gradual, uncertain, nearly invisible until you realized they'd always been there. Pearl, the youngest, had taken to Ava's old rocking chair like it was a cradle. She made no demands, just pressed her small body into its curve and stared out the window with eyes so round and solemn that they reminded Ava of the full moon rising slow over the canyon. The boy Joey followed Ava through every room, toy horse clutched in his hands like a talisman. He never spoke above a murmur, but when Ava moved, whether to stoke the fire or lift a bucket from the well, he was there, watching, absorbing, like a sponge desperate to soak up safety. Sammy, the middle one, bounced between laughter and silence. His feet never quite sat still, even when he did. He'd taken to rearranging the few carved animals on Ava's shelf. One morning she found her old wedding photograph, faded now, cracked at the corners, nestled between a wooden chicken and a cow he'd turned backwards. It should have unsettled her. Instead, it made her smile. And then there was Etta, the oldest. Etta who rose before dawn and tried to sweep the porch without being asked. Etta who kept her eyes on the others, but rarely on Ava. There was steel in her, not the kind forged in fire, but the sort made by walking through one too many miles of desert with no one to carry you. Ava gave them space, not out of coldness, but reverence. You don't rush rain onto dry earth. You wait. You watch. You pray the roots are still alive. She cooked them oatmeal with dried apples and milk. They ate it slowly, not because they didn't like it, but because they didn't quite believe it would last. At night, she lit the oil lamp and read aloud from the old stories she kept in the drawer, tales of lost riders and wandering stars, of homes found after long travels. The boys listened with wide eyes. Pearl fell asleep against Ava's shoulder more than once. Etta never dozed. She listened like she was memorizing the endings in case they needed them later. One evening, Ava caught her folding the linens with tight precision. The girl's hands moved like she'd done it 100 times before. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Ava asked gently. Etta hesitated. "Mama made us help before she got sick." Ava didn't ask more. She just nodded and handed her the next towel. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was earned. By the end of the week, the children knew the creak in the front stair, the sound of rain on the barn roof, the way the light moved across the kitchen floor each morning. Ava found a drawing tacked to the pantry door, 3 crooked chickens, one with a hat, and a woman beside them tall as the sky. Joey's name signed in shaky pencil at the bottom. There were still hard moments. Sammy had a nightmare and woke screaming, kicking at the blanket like it was a snare. Pearl sobbed any time someone closed a door too fast. And once, while Ava was digging up potatoes, she found Etta sitting behind the barn with her arms wrapped tight around her knees, face turned to the wood, as if trying to disappear into it. "I won't let him take us again," she whispered when Ava sat beside her. Ava didn't ask who they were. She just put a hand on Etta's shoulder and left it there until the trembling stopped. One afternoon, a shadow fell across the porch. A preacher, thin, sharp-eyed, with a voice like dry corn husks, stood there holding his hat against his chest. His name was Reverend Dixon, and he traveled between small towns and ranches, spreading both gospel and gossip. "Miss Walsh," he said, nodding. Ava looked up from the sewing in her lap. "Reverend, I heard tell you took in some young uns," he said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. Ava didn't rise. "They were lost. I found them." He stepped closer. "Word is, a family wagon was taken by outlaws near Devil's Tooth. Just 4 children made it out. No lawman's come forward, but it's in God's hands now." Ava gave a small nod. "Seems he's using mine." The Reverend paused. His eyes swept over the porch, Pearl asleep in a blanket nearby, Sammy on the step with a stick pretending it was a sword, Joey whispering to his horse. Etta stood behind the screen door, unmoving, unreadable. "I'd be careful," he said. "Some folks see kindness as trespass." "I reckon they'll survive it," Ava said. "So will I." He tipped his hat and walked away. Ava watched him disappear down the path. She noticed the way Etta relaxed only after he was gone. That night, Ava didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a candle stub burning low, watching the shadows dance on the walls. The house, once so still, now breathed like a thing alive. She could hear each child, restless turns in sleep, small murmurs, the occasional thump of a foot against the bed frame. The rooms had not grown bigger, but they'd grown warmer. Ava had lived so long without being needed that it frightened her how quickly she'd become necessary. They looked at her now when they scraped a knee or spilled milk. They waited for her to bless the bread or light the lamp. They trusted her with their hunger, their silence, their sleep. She hadn't asked for them. But now, without them, the house would feel wrong again. She looked at her own hands, coarse from ranch work, calloused from weather and years. Not mother's hands, perhaps, but they were steady. They were clean. They knew how to carry things that might break. She rose quietly and slipped into the hall, checking each doorway. One by one, Pearl's breathing was even, mouth open, curls stuck to her cheeks. Joey snored softly, toy horse clutched to his chest. Sammy had kicked off all the covers again, limbs flung like a starfish. And Etta was awake, eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling like she was memorizing something only she could see. Ava didn't say anything. She just pulled the blanket a little higher up at his chest. Etta didn't move, but her lips parted, and just before Ava stepped away, she whispered a word so soft it almost didn't make it across the room. "Okay." Ava paused in the doorway, heart beating slow and full. It wasn't much, but it was everything. And somewhere, deep in the bones of the old house, the wood settled, not in warning, but in welcome. The ranch began to change in quiet ways, like the first warm wind after a long winter. You don't always notice the shift right away, but you feel it. In the way the porch boards seemed to hold laughter longer. In the way Ava left the kitchen window open more often, so the sound of children's voices could drift through like music played on an old fiddle. Etta had started reading to the others, out loud, her voice even and slow, a finger tracking each word. Joey would lean against her, sucking on the ear of his stuffed horse. Sammy, fidgeting and squirming, pretended not to care, but never left the room. Pearl sat in Ava's lap most days, thumbing the buttons on her blouse, resting her head under Ava's chin as if it had always been hers. They didn't talk about the desert. Not directly. Not the way they'd been found or what came before. But sometimes Ava would see Etta tracing patterns in the dust with her toe, eyes far away, and she knew the past still visited. Just quieter now, like a ghost who'd been asked, gently, to go sit on the porch. One morning Ava caught herself humming. The song was old, something her mother sang, while hanging linens under prairie sun. She stopped, surprised by the sound of her own contentment. It felt like forgetting how heavy a coat was until you took it off. She let it stay. A week later, the county man came. He rode up on a tall bay horse, hat too clean for someone who belonged out here. His name was Roland Price, and he introduced himself with the confidence of someone who expected things to go his way. Ava offered him water, which he accepted with a nod. Then he opened his satchel and pulled out a sheaf of folded papers. "I'm here about the children," he said. Ava felt the old ache bloom in her chest, sharp and slow, like thorns rising through skin. "They're safe here," she said evenly. "I'm sure they are," Price replied. "But legality's not about kindness. It's about order." She didn't like the way he looked at the children, who had gathered behind the screen door like wild things sensing a trap. Pearl had her fingers wrapped in Ava's apron hem. Joey held his toy horse tighter than usual. "I've got reports from a preacher and some folks from town," Price went on. "For children all underage, none related to you by blood or law. That puts them in state custody, technically." Ava didn't answer. He pulled another paper from his folder, offering it like an invitation. "There are families in Prescott, people who can take them in proper schooling, church. Stability. Stability ain't a building with pews," Ava said softly. "It's hands that hold when you cry. Rooms that stay lit when you wake up scared." Price tilted his head, as if trying to decipher whether she was being poetic or simply foolish. "You can file to foster them, of course," he said, refolding the paper neatly. "But it's a process. There'll be inspections. A court hearing." "And if I don't?" she asked. He shrugged, like the answer didn't cost him anything. "Then we'll be back in a week, with someone less polite." She stood there as he mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "I'm sorry," he said, as if that made it easier. As he rode off, Ava didn't go back inside right away. She stood on the porch, feeling Pearl's fingers still wound into her apron, Sammy's forehead pressed against her hip. Etta stepped out beside her. "They'll take us?" she asked. Not fear, not surprise, just weary certainty, like it had happened before. Ava turned to her, not without a fight. Etta stared up at her, eyes as clear and sharp as a hawk's. "You'd fight for us?" "I already am." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Ava walked out to the barn. The air was cool, the stars scattered thick above the ridgeline. She didn't need light to find her way. This land was as familiar to her as her own bones. Tom Reyes was there, mending the gate by lantern. He worked slow, steady. Not a man who filled silences, but one who made them feel easier. Ava leaned against the stall. "You heard? I saw him leave. They want to take them." Tom nodded, then looked at her, eyes dark and kind. "Are you going to let them?" "No." "Then what do you need?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. No one had asked her that in a long time. "Your name," she said at last. "On a paper. Says I'm not doing this alone." He didn't blink. "You have it." Just like that. No grand proposal. No rescuing gesture. Just a man choosing to stand beside her. When Ava returned to the house, she found Etta waiting in the hallway, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm not sleepy," Etta said. Ava nodded. "That's all right." They sat on the floor together, backs against the wall, listening to the wind shift through the cracks. "You know," Ava said after a while, "when I first bought this place, everyone said I was foolish. Said no woman should try to live out here alone." Etta looked at her. "Were they right?" Ava smiled. "I reckon I was waiting on something. Or someone." She didn't say more. Didn't need to. Etta leaned her head on Ava's shoulder. "Can I stay?" "Yes, baby. You already are." Ava wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. The house was quiet, but not empty. Outside, the wind passed through the trees like a hymn. Inside, something deeper settled. Not certainty, not safety, but something close. Something worth choosing. Spring arrived like a secret finally spoken. The dry wind softened, and the wild grass rose up in patches along the hill behind the barn, yellow-green and trembling with possibility. Ava's ranch, once known only for its stubbornness against drought, began to look like something gentler. Not tamed, never that, but changed, as if the earth itself had drawn a breath it hadn't dared before. The children took to it like seeds to rain. Joey learned to run with bare feet, laughing like he had a voice made of sunlight. Pearl toddled through the wildflowers with her arms outstretched, as if trying to hug the whole world at once. Sammy found an old slingshot in the barn and declared himself protector of hens, patrolling the yard like a tiny sheriff with dust on his nose. And Etta began to smile. It was a slow, rare thing, like a bloom that only opened at dusk. But it came most often when she helped Ava hang laundry, or when Pearl curled against her, sleeping deeply in the crook of her arm. She still kept watch, still noticed every shift in voice, every shadow moving too fast. But her shoulders eased, her eyes lingered longer on the sky. The house felt fuller now, even in silence. Ava found herself humming again, this time on purpose. There were biscuits in the oven more often than not, and the scent of soap drifted from the back porch, where small shirts and socks flapped like little white flags of surrender. But not everyone welcomed the change. One afternoon, while Ava traded butter for feed at the general store, a voice spoke behind her. "You've made yourself a fine little project." She turned. Wesley Granger, tall and trim, with a smile that once might have made her blush when she was younger. He'd courted her once, long ago, before her husband, before her solitude became armor. His clothes were too clean, his words too smooth. "Not a project," Ava said. "A life." He tipped his hat, that smirk never leaving his face. "Still seems a burden. For children, all that noise. A woman your age deserves peace." Ava didn't answer, but Etta stepped forward, clutching the basket of flour. Her chin lifted. "She's not alone," Etta said, voice clear as church bells. Granger raised an eyebrow. "Oh no." "She has us," Etta said. Ava placed a hand on Etta's shoulder, not to silence her, but in thanks. They left the store without another word, the sun falling in warm streaks across their backs. Later that evening, Tom Reyes stopped by. He didn't knock. He never did. Just arrived with a quiet presence, like dusk sliding over the porch. He carried fence wire and a basket of eggs. Said little, but his eyes took in everything. The way Sammy chased a grasshopper, the way Joey still clutched his horse during supper, the new sag in the barn's roof. "You don't have to fix everything," Ava said as he hammered a loose board. Tom glanced over. "Not everything. Just what I can reach." When he stayed for supper, Ava added a plate without comment. The children accepted him without fanfare, as if they knew better than to question someone who shows up over and over without needing to be asked. That night, Ava and Tom sat on the porch while the children played under the fading sky. "You ever think," she said slowly, "that love isn't about what you feel, but what you keep showing up for?" Tom looked out toward the pasture, where the fence line held steady against the wind. "Every day," he said. She didn't reach for his hand, but she didn't pull away when his brushed hers, rough palm against rougher fingers. Then came the letter, folded, official, sealed with a stamp of the county. Inside a date, a time, a courtroom in town, a final hearing to determine custody. Ava read it 3 times, heart thudding like hooves against hardpan. She had done everything right. Fed them, clothed them, taught them, loved them. But courts didn't care about love. They cared about law, about bloodlines and proper roofs and names on deeds. That night, Etta stood by the back window while Ava dried the dishes. "You scared?" Etta asked. Ava considered. "Not of the judge." "Then what?" "Of having to prove what we already know." Etta nodded. "We'll help." In the days that followed, the house pulsed with quiet preparations. Ava cleaned rooms already clean. The children practiced standing still, speaking clear. Tom fixed the barn roof without being asked. He left a letter of his own, an affidavit swearing Ava's fitness as a guardian, and his promise to stand with her, however she needed. The night before the hearing, a storm rolled in. Not lightning and thunder, but wind that whispered through the cracks and carried the scent of rain not yet fallen. Ava lay awake, listening to the breath of foresleeping children and the steady creak of the house around them. She had nothing left to prove, and everything to lose. Just before dawn, Joey crawled into her bed, whispering of bad dreams. Ava held him against her chest, his small heart beating like a bird's wing. "You're safe," she murmured. "I've got you." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. By morning, the wind had stilled. The road to town waited, long and dusty, with questions at the end. But as Ava dressed the children, each in the best clothes she could offer, shirts scrubbed clean and patched with care, she felt something stronger than fear settle in her chest. Not certainty, but conviction. They were hers, not by blood, but by every sacred thing that mattered more. Dawn spilled slow across the hills, pink and gold like a promise not yet made. The children rode in the back of Tom's wagon, dressed in their finest, a mismatched gathering of brushed hair, hand-mended collars, and small fingers clutched together. Ava sat up front beside Tom, her hands calm on her lap, though her stomach felt full of stones. The courthouse was still miles off, but the weight of it pressed heavy. She wasn't afraid of judges. She was afraid of not being heard. The town looked smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she'd grown larger, expanded by love, by the sound of 4 children calling her Ma, without hesitation. Folks stared as they passed, the widow rancher, the orphans, the quiet man beside her. She met each glance with the same level gaze. Let them see what kindness had built. Inside the courtroom, it was too cold, too clean. Pearl clung to her hem. Joey fidgeted with his toy horse, its ear nearly rubbed smooth. Etta stood tall, hands behind her back like a soldier. Sammy grinned at the bailiff and was quickly hushed. The judge was pale and brisk, his spectacles glinting in the morning light. Beside him, County Officer Price looked smug, papers stacked neat and sharp as blades. He stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the children are wards of the state, currently residing with Miss Ava Walsh. She is unmarried, without prior parental history, and resides on a remote homestead with limited access to medical and educational services. While her care appears adequate, the law requires more than affection." Ava listened, quiet, steady. When asked to speak, she rose, smoothed her skirt. "I can't offer more than what's already in their eyes," she said. "They eat well. They sleep safe. They laugh again. I don't know the shape of every law, but I know what a home feels like. This is one." The judge frowned, as if weighing words not by meaning, but by legality. Then Tom stepped forward. He handed over the letter he'd written, stating plainly that he lived nearby, that he helped on the ranch, that he was willing to sign whatever they asked. "They're not alone," he said. Not anymore. It helped. Not enough to silence the court, but enough to slow it. Still, the judge asked for time. For review. They were told to return in 2 days. Back at the ranch, silence hung like thick fog. Ava moved through chores as if underwater. The children followed her mood, quieter than usual. The kettle didn't whistle. The wind didn't rise. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ava stood by the gate, watching the sky. The raven was back, just one, circling high. It had followed them for months now, silent witness, dark feather against pale clouds. It never landed, just watched. Ava raised her chin, met its gaze. "Keep watch," she whispered. "We'll need it." The warning came on hoofbeats. A neighbor rode fast and breathless, dusk thick on his clothes. "Riders," he gasped. 5 or 6. Bandits from Devil's Tooth. Heading this way. Heard you've got children. Heard you're alone." Ava didn't flinch. "I'm not alone." Tom was already saddling his horse. Within the hour, lanterns burned at the edges of her land. Friends arrived. Not many, but enough. The preacher, the shopkeeper's son, a ranch hand with a crooked knee and a good heart. None carried rifles without knowing how to use them. They waited in silence, the kind not born of fear, but readiness. Ava stood on the porch with her rifle slung over her shoulder, Etta beside her. The boys and Pearl were in the cellar with blankets and water, just as they'd practiced. The air smelled of sage and iron. When the riders came, they came loud, shouting, laughing, assuming. They didn't expect resistance. They certainly didn't expect a woman to fire the first shot. Ava did, not to wound, but to warn. The second shot came from Tom. That one grazed a shoulder. The bandits reeled, surprised. Their laughter cracked like ice. Then came voices from the dark, neighbors, steady, calm, lanterns swinging in firm hands. The ranch seemed to swell, more than it was. The land itself seemed to rise and say not here. By the time it ended, no one lay dead. The bandits fled, bruised and confused. And in the quiet after, Ava sat on the porch step, her rifle across her lap, Tom beside her, Etta clutching a lantern. No one cheered. There was only breath, relief, and the smell of dust settling. The next day, word spread, not of the attack, but of the stand. And 2 days later, in that cold courtroom, the judge looked down at his papers, then back at Ava. "I've reconsidered," he said. "This court believes that family is not defined by blood, but by bond. Miss Walsh, the children are yours if you'll have them." Ava's voice didn't break, but her knees nearly did. "I will," she said, soft and sure. Sammy hooped. Pearl clapped. Joey hugged her legs. Etta didn't move. She just stared at Ava, eyes wide and glistening, and whispered, "We can stay?" Ava nodded. "Always." Outside, the raven circled once, then vanished into morning light. That evening, the ranch glowed from within. Oil lamps lit the kitchen. Biscuits rose golden in the oven. Pearl fell asleep with flour on her nose. Joey told his toy horse everything that had happened. Sammy tried on Tom's hat and announced he'd be sheriff one day. Ava stood by the porch rail, looking out over her land. Tom came beside her, quiet as always. "You built this," he said. She shook her head. "We did." He looked down, then up. His hand found hers. "What now?" he asked. Ava smiled. "Now we live." The wind stirred the grass. In the barn, laughter rang out. And somewhere far above, a raven flew with its wings wide and unburdened. Some miracles don't come in thunder. Some walk in on tired feet, wearing rags and carrying silence. Some grow from the smallest acts of kindness, until they fill a house with warmth that lingers even after the fires burned low. This was one of those, and it stayed.